Well, hello. I am starting again in Daniel 3 because someone told me they couldn't hear me. Um, and then I just read other comments and everyone says they can hear me fine. So I am so sorry about that. I've never had to do this before, but I was trying to accommodate so that everyone could hear. I hope you can hear me now. If you find me again, this is sort of silly. I'm on my daughter's laptop. And we're going to start over on Daniel 3. Okay, so I'm so sorry we're getting a late start here. It's a good thing everyone can be flexible. I'm really sorry that you have to try to find me again. Hopefully people will realize what's going on when they see my comments in the chat. Oh my goodness, so sorry. Okay, well, I had started to read in chapter 3, but we're just going to do it again. I had made a bunch of comments about how in chapter 2 Nebuchadnezzar was, hopefully please someone come on here and tell me you can hear me. Anyway, I had made a comment in chapter 2 that or about chapter 2 that Nebuchadnezzar had bowed his knee to God and said, "You are the one true God." And he was just amazed that Daniel had the interpretation of his dream. And here in chapter 3, which some commentators think it's about 16 years later, not quite sure about that, but however long it took for Nebuchadnezzar to forget that God had just interpreted his dream, given Daniel actually the dream before Nebuchadnezzar could have even told him what it was. And then, now he is just forgetting or something. And I don't know what happened. I don't know why Nebuchadnezzar kind of went back to his old ways, but he still wanted power. Okay, so let's see. I'm just going to make sure people know I'm on. A new computer, trying to get this thing going. Okay, because I know I've left a few of you in the other place where we started. Lord, I pray that you would get this straightened out and have people find me. Thank you, Lord, for doing that. Now, hold on here, and I'll just get started here. If I can just see on my phone that this is going. Okay. All right. Well, I leave it in your hands, Jesus. All right, so we're going to start reading in chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar had a golden statue made that was 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and he erected the statue on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then ordered an assembly of his princes, magistrates, and governors, as well as the counselors, treasurers, judges, sheriffs, and all the other provincial authorities, that they should be present at the dedication of the statue he had erected. So all these officials gathered in front of the golden statue that the king had made, and then a herald made the loud proclamation, "Attention, everyone! Listen to what the king commands of you, you of every nation and language. When you hear the ram's horn and the music of the flute, the lyre, the 10-stringed harp, the triangular harp, the drums, and all the other instruments, you will bow down to the ground and worship the golden statue and King Nebuchadnezzar has made." Let me see if I can pin this. Yeah. Whoever does not bow down to worship it will immediately be thrown into a white hot fiery furnace. Okay, So he's back to these incredible threats of people going to lose their life, and Daniel responded so well. But here's the thing about chapter 3. Daniel is not in this chapter. It's just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And those three are walking out their life by faith without Daniel there. Daniel's inside the king's palace. That's where we left him in chapter 2. And so they're having to respond to all of this without their comrade, without their leader. Okay, so I think that's really significant. What are we going to say and do when we are being tested and tried and we're on our own? So this statue that was erected was huge. There's actually still a place where they have found what they think is the platform where the statue was erected. And they think it wasn't probably solid gold. You know, it's a gold statue, but they think that it was probably made of wood and then overlaid with gold. That's how they did things back then. And the princes, the magistrates, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the sheriffs, every person that was in authority was invited to come and to worship this statue. And not the common people, but the leaders. I'm not sure, actually, it just makes me wonder why Daniel wasn't there. But that, again, is God's sovereignty, and he was working this out without him in the midst of it. So then a herald, Therefore, at the set time, as soon as they heard the musical instruments, those present from all nations and languages bowed down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So this like symphony that was playing, all of these instruments that were playing were inviting the people into worship, just like what happens in church with us. There was a ram's horn, the music of the flute, the lyre, the 10-stringed harp, the triangular harp, the drums, all the other instruments that they had at the time. And they just succumbed. The people just obeyed. And he was, in a sense, Nebuchadnezzar was setting up a counterfeit temple worship. And he had all the worshipers, complete with all the musicians, and he erected a brazen furnace instead of an altar to God. And instead of the golden ark of glory, he had an idolatrous golden statue that he had made. And he thought that he was going to sacrifice the 3 Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, into the fire as an offering to this false god, to this statue. All right, so I'm on page 243. I'm really sad that people are not on with me and don't know where I am. I feel like this is such an important chapter. I don't know why, but God's in control. All right, so page 243, the condemnation of the young Jewish men. At that point, the certain Babylonian astrologers approached the king and maliciously denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You issued a royal decree, O king, that when everyone hears the ram's horn and the music begins, they must bow down to the ground and worship the golden image, and whoever does not bow down and worship it will be thrown inside a white-hot, fiery furnace. Yet the prominent Jews, whom you have appointed administrators of the province of Babylon, have greatly disrespected you, your majesty. Their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They do not serve your gods nor worship the golden image you have set up. So they're trying to get these three in trouble. And they are falsely accusing them. And, well, actually it's true. They won't bow down, so they're not actually falsely accusing them. But they are trying to bring them to the king in a bad light because of jealousy and envy, and they want their spots, and they don't want these guys to have any authority. So upon hearing this, King Nebuchadnezzar flew into a furious rage and ordered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought before him. And when these men came before the king, he asked them, "Is it true, Shadrach," or what it really means is this deliberate, you guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden statue that I erected? I now give you one more chance. Well, hey, Nebuchadnezzar, you just had your dream interpreted. It was an absolute miracle. You bowed down before the one true God, and now you want these guys to change their minds? They're not going to do it. When you hear the ram's horn and the music of the flute, the lyre, the 10-stringed harp, the triangular harp, and the drums, and all the other instruments, you will bow down to the ground and worship the golden statue I've made. But if you refuse to worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a white-hot fiery furnace. So now who is the God that can save you from my power? All right, well, he should know. He's just making threats. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered King Nebuchadnezzar, "We have no need to offer you a defense in this matter. We don't have to defend our God or defend ourselves." Isn't that beautiful? If the God we serve truly exists, then he will save us from death at your hand, O king. So if you throw us into the fiery furnace, our God is able to save us. But even if he does not save us, you can be sure, O king, that we would not serve your gods or worship the golden statue that you have erected. All right. This is something, there's something I want to read to you from a commentary that I thought was really interesting, because I love the response that these guys give to him. I wonder who was actually speaking. I wonder which of the three of them actually spoke back to him and told them that they were not going to bow. This commentator, he makes suggestions of how easy it is to compromise and how easy it could have been to justify bowing down to them, and what kinds of ways the enemy tempts us to compromise. And I want to read them to you because I'm sure all of us would have these thoughts going through our mind. So the first one he says is, they might have said, "There's nothing to gain by resisting. Wouldn't we do more good by living?" So they could have just thought, we need to stay alive because we need to finish our assignment. So let's just do this one quick act of disobedience and bow down. It's easy to say we must live, but in reality we all must die. So why not die making a stand for God? That's the way they actually looked at it instead. And then secondly, they might have said, we're in a different place. We're in Rome, so we can just do as the Romans do. So they weren't in their home in Jerusalem, and they may have just thought, well, nobody's going to see us. We're out of the, of our homeland. But they knew God had unlimited jurisdiction, and they wanted to obey the one true audience rather than man. They were looking towards God as who they were obeying, and that was their audience, the audience of one. Or he said, third, they might have said, we will all lose our jobs and our standard of living. And he says sometimes we compromise and we make the blessing of God an idol, and we compromise God to keep what we have. So even if we lose everything, he's making the suggestion that that's the right thing to do. And then I really liked this fourth one, because this is really how we can begin to think, or be tempted to think. They might have said, after all, we're not being called to renounce our God. We're not bowing down to the idol, but only bowing down in respect for the king or in honor of the music. So they could have made it about something else other than what they knew truly what the king was requiring of them. And that wasn't the truth. So they withstood. Another, number 5, they could have just compromised by saying, well, everybody else is doing it. And instead, they cultivated brave personalities, and they were willing to stand alone with God. Yay, Jeannie found me. I'm so thankful, Jeannie. I wasn't sure if anybody would find me trying to do this again. I started over because I was told I wasn't able to be heard. I'm so sorry for all the confusion. I hope you can hear me now. All right, and then 6, they might have said something like, it's only for once and not for very long, 10 minutes just for the king. It's stupid to throw our lives away for just 10 minutes of honoring the king. And that, I believe, is probably the number one thought that comes through our mind, is that we'll only go into this bar or into this place for 10 minutes and compromise, our belief system or our heartfelt, love for God for 10 minutes, and we'll still have our lives. And actually, this commentator says 10 minutes can chart your course for eternity. And so they knew not to take the bait. And then another 7th way they could have thought is, this is more than can be expected of us. God will understand just this one time. It's true that God understands our struggle with sin. That's why he loves the sinner and made provision at the cross for freedom from the penalty, power, and presence of sin. Knowing that God understands that we're but, made of dust, that should spur us on to more obedience rather than to be disobedient. It's not a license to sin. And I think of how sexual sin is probably the one that pulls us in by this manner of reasoning, when we just think, oh, just this one time. God will overlook this. Or when someone's got an addiction and they think, oh, just, one time I'll smoke this weed and I'll be away from these people, I'm on vacation and that's what they do here, and then I'll be away from them and I'll be fine again. But all these little compromises are what these 3 men decided not to live like. They decided to live in pure obedience and to obey God, even if they got thrown into the fire. Okay, so those are just some thoughts about what they could have said, but what they said heroically was on page 244 in verse 15. If you throw us into the fiery furnace, our God is able to save us. But even if he doesn't save us, you can be sure, O king, that we would not serve your gods or worship the golden statue you have erected. So after going through all those thought processes that we just did and dismissing them, we see that their faith is absolutely firm in the God who's able to save their lives. And I admire them so much. I just stagger at the amount of faith that chapter 3 is filled with. And again, if you were not on here when I said this, remember, Daniel's nowhere to be found. It's just these 3 guys on their own. Their leader, their comrade, is not with them. and yet they're able to say no. And that is amazing. All right, so then we read Daniel's 3 friends are sentenced to death. And upon hearing this, Nebuchadnezzar was filled with anger, and his face was distorted with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he ordered his men to heat the fiery furnace 7 times hotter. They actually don't know how hot it was, but they just used this, they had no way of determining what 7 times hotter would be, but I assure you it was hot. He commanded some of his mighty men to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the white hot furnace. So these guys weren't even able to think of escaping on their own. That option was taken from them. They were bound up together. They were tied up. Immediately they tied up the 3 men while they still had on all of their clothes, their trousers, shirts, their turbans, and then they threw them into the white hot furnace. Imagine this. This is horrific. But because the king's command was so urgent and the furnace so overheated, guess what happened? The raging flames burned up the men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fire. The guys that carried them in got burned themselves, and the 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, tied and bound, fell inside the blazing white-hot furnace. I can't help but think that this is where our media would leave this story today. I think that they would just make everybody believe that they were burnt to a crisp and never to be seen again. But that is not what happened. God intervened. I hope that you can hear me, you guys. Please let me know. I would hate for all this to be going on again and I can't be heard. Suddenly, King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and asked his officials. This makes me just want to shout. Remember I said I might have to stand up to preach in some of these. This is the point where I feel like standing up. Nebuchadnezzar says, "Didn't we throw 3 men bound in fetters into the fire? Didn't we throw 3 men in?" Suddenly, and they said, "That's correct, Your Majesty." They answered him, and but look, he shouted. This makes me laugh. "I see 4 men walking about freely in the fire. They are all unharmed. And the 4th man has the appearance of a son of the gods." It is another Christophany. It is another time that Jesus, our Savior, our Master, our King, entered into the fiery furnace with these 3. And so he will do with us. Then Nebuchadnezzar cautiously approached the opening of the white-hot burning furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the great God, come out here now." Oh my gosh, this guy is crazy. So out of the midst of the fire walked Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, completely unharmed. So apparently they were unloosed because they'd been bound up. So the King of Kings and Lord of Lords loosed them. And this is probably my favorite part of this whole chapter. When all the king's officials had assembled along with the princes, magistrates, and governors, they discovered that the fire had not harmed these 3 men. This is my favorite sentence. Their hair was not singed, their clothes were not scorched, and they didn't even smell like smoke. Do you know what a miracle this is? When God comes in and walks among the flames with you, you're not going to have your hair singed, you're not going to have your clothing burned, and you're not even going to smell like smoke. And in light of what we're seeing in Hawaii right now, this image of this miracle has to be completely mind-blowing, miraculous, as we've seen what fire can do. And yet God was proving a point to Nebuchadnezzar and to the kingdom that he was God. And that he would come and intervene, that he would come and be with them physically there. Oh, what will we want to say to these men when we see them in heaven? What was it like? What was it like to be thrown, to be thrust, and to know in your last seconds, potential last seconds, that only God could deliver you. Only God could step in and do this. King Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." Okay, well, finally he's making sense, for he sent his divine messenger to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They disobeyed my orders and laid their lives on the line rather than serve or worship any god but their own. So I hereby make this decree: any person from any nation or language who says anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb, and his house will be destroyed, because there's no other God who's able to rescue so miraculously. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the province of Babylon. And so the guys that were trying to speak ill of them didn't get their way, and these guys got promoted. And God got glorified. He was praised by the one and only person in the whole kingdom who could make this declaration loud and clear. And we have this story to comfort one another. We have this beautiful remembrance of what happened in Daniel 3 for the rest of our lives, for whatever situation we're in, that God will be with us and he will deliver us. I just want to read in the notes a little bit about the flames. They jumped out of the furnace 49 cubits, which is over 86 feet. And additionally, according to the Sanhedrin book, Nebuchadnezzar himself was burned. He was half burned, they say. And in the, I was saying yesterday that the Roman Catholic edition of the Bible has some extra verses in this book especially that we don't have in our Bible. And they have something called the Song of the Three Young Men. And there's 66 verses not found in the Aramaic. The Song and the Prayer of Azariah, the Song, and the Song of these Three Young Men. And the first three verses of this version read, "The three young Hebrews walked around in the midst of the flames, singing hymns to God and blessing the Lord. Then Azariah stood still in the fire and prayed aloud, 'Blessed are you, O Lord God of our ancestors, and worthy of praise, and glorious is your name forever.'" So maybe it was Azariah actually that spoke up to the king, because in the Catholic version here it says that he spoke out to declarations of praise in the midst of the fire as they walked around singing. So I just wanted to bring this word today in our devotion about how God is faithful and how he promises to be with us in the fire, in the flames. I just hope this builds your faith and your trust in him, that he says that he will go through anything with us. I'm sure we all have testimonies of how God has walked with us and been so faithful to us. And I just bless you today with that realization again, and just thank you for going through this glitch today. I hope tomorrow, I hope whatever was wrong will be restored. I'll be back on my regular computer and I'll just forge ahead. So thank you again, and bless your Thursday, and tomorrow we'll be in chapter 4. Bye-bye.